Good morning. And if it's Sunday, it's Free Talk with Mr. B. We're getting into another episode of Suffered in Silence, Turn the Pain into Power. And today we have a special guest on. Maya, would you introduce our guests?
Hi, good morning. Good morning, United Kingdom, and good morning to you, Mr. B, in the United
Hey.
States. Of course, it's too early in there. And good morning, Mr. Conlan from United Kingdom, and thank you for joining with us. And this is our, I think, the sixth or fifth episodes, fourth week or fifth week of our podcast. And welcome, Mr. Conland, and thank you for joining with us. And good afternoon, Philippines. How are you, Hana, and everyone?
Yeah, I'm good here in Davao City, Philippines. Hi, everyone.
We've been covering the subject of suffered in silence, and we know it's a sensitive subject, yes, serious, but we refuse to back down from it. And we want to make sure even we here in this podcast can turn pain into power. And so it's really nice to have you on, Mr. Conlon, and so that you can tell us, because as we were going through the book, we got to the point where Maya was talking about, regardless of her pain, and regardless of the point where she was in establishing her power, she had to take care of herself and work because her grandfather just died, and her grandmother just couldn't keep her going to school. What was she supposed to do? In fact, Maya, you tell us about that one real quick.
Yes. First of all, because of my parents couldn't longer afford to look after me, and of course, my grandparents, they are a little bit well off because they have a farm and they have a they have also people that they paid for to look after the farms, rice, corn, coconuts, something like this. And so my parents, my father was working in a banana plantation during the time, but his wages not enough for all of us, and of course he drank too much, and he spent a lot of time, a lot of money to buy some alcohol. Or even though I'm not ashamed to voice out how was my father was
Wow.
when we are young. Yeah, so I'm not ashamed that he was heavily drunkards in our village, and a lot of people knows about him because of his number one drunkards in the village. And
Okay.
so his wages not enough to buy some food for us. So my grandparents decided to take us away from our parents to look after, and send us to school, me and my elder brother. In the Philippines, it wasn't easy to live before without the support of the background. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I
And
know Harlene
that
as
was in
well.
the Manuel Janga area also. That's where that was.
Y- Yes, Manuel Ganga, Purok, Purok 6. I can't remember what Purok we are. I'm sorry. I'm not
That's
remember.
right. Okay.
But I live in Purok dos before at Purok 1, and now Purok 2. So my parents, I will call that my parents' place, because that's where my parents live, and my grandparents live. So I would say that my parents live in and Dipag, Manuel Gianga.
I
So
see.
yeah.
And that's near Harlene. That's near you too, right?
Yeah, yes,
Yes,
it's
yes.
near.
Okay. Okay.
Here.
Well, Malcolm is on, and he has been speaking social media promoter and discussion about poverty and impoverishment in certain parts of the world, especially the Philippines. And so maybe I know you have a perspective on it. I'm really looking forward to hearing it, because we know the pain was, we're talking about as being sexually abused as a child, but it had other pains around her, and poverty is also part of the pain that added to this, that caused her circumstances. Malcolm, maybe you can tell us your perspective of what you saw and what you know.
Uh, yes. So hello everybody. I'm not sure if I'm on camera at the moment. I can't really see myself
You
on
are, you
camera.
are.
Okay, yeah.
You are.
So you know, I've got to be honest, life can be pretty tough in the Philippines unless you have a regular job and a regular income. And this means that Filipinos, in many respects, are actually forced to actually work abroad. So you have, of course, the OFWs, or the overseas Filipino workers, and there are more than 11 million of them in pretty much every country, every
Wow.
area of the world, of course, in the United States, and basically everywhere. And of course, the reality is that you've got to find a way of going abroad. And of course, one of them may be through nursing, which is much in demand, through carers. And I think domestic workers sometimes tend to go to the Middle East as well. If you've got the engineers and everything else. But the fact is, you've got to do whatever you can to get abroad. I'd like to see a day that staying in the Philippines is going to become a reality. But right now, because of economic circumstances, people are often forced to go abroad to survive. You know, I don't
Yes.
know if you're aware, but medical care is astronomically expensive. You know, it's if you want to see a consultant in a hospital, maybe you're paying around about $15. But if you want a course of medicine, you're paying maybe $100. If you want one test, it's $200. Now, if you're only earning maybe $100 a month, $200 a month, how can you afford these things? So life is pretty tough. And this means people make that sacrifice. And in sometimes parents have to actually leave their own children back home in the Philippines so that they can work abroad. And of course, in the case of our other guests, you know, they have family members maybe looking after them, etc. Maybe grandparents. I can't remember. I think it's Maya, or no, it's yourself. The other lady has grandparents looking after her, and that's fine. But you know what? There is that age gap. Then that, you know, the fact is, I've even heard of a terrible case where neighbors have been looking after a child
Children.
because the parents have worked abroad. And you know,
Yeah.
that has a lot of impact, and of course it leads to unfortunate or terrible circumstances. So you know, it's very, very important that the Philippines finds a way of overcoming this problem. I think it's several $billion are used in overseas remittances every year, and this, I think, accounts for 6% of the gross domestic product of the Philippines. And of course, the Philippines was one of the only countries who were not affected by the global recession because, of course, Filipinos just sent more money home. So that's the
Right.
reality of it. So it's
Yeah.
very difficult, and I don't know how it's going to improve. But life is very, very tough in the Philippines unless you have money, and that's one of the major issues. That's kind of a bit of an introduction, if you like.
And
Yeah.
interesting because I lived in the Dubai for a while where there's a large population of Kabayans, and uh,
Mm.
and I wanted to podcast them too because I wanted the people at home to know that they were not having a bed of roses in Dubai. Or I saw when I visited Hong Kong many times that people would be staying outside on the weekend because if they're doing a home care, the homeowner does not want them home on the weekend for some reason, so they stay on the streets. And this I see too much sometimes, so it's bothersome. But just think having to suffer in silence and thinking about how to turn the pain into power and still dealing with outside circumstances. I know in Maya, in her book, and again, these consequential, um, I don't know if it ever happened to Hana, but could you imagine trafficking? Could you imagine running into the potential of being trafficked also? And
You
those
know,
are some
it's
Yeah.
of the consequences. Yeah.
You know, unfortunately, and I hate to say this, some Filipinos feel that they need to do whatever they can to survive. And, you know, even medicine is expensive. You know, I have to say, I'm quite big on social media, and I get messages every day from parents who maybe can't even afford a single tube of ointment for their children's skin. And, you know, that's the reality of it. You know, there are people having to beg to survive, which is absolutely shocking. And you know, parents will do whatever they can to support their children, and this means working abroad. And sometimes they don't even see their own children grow up. You know, the children's first walking, attending school, you know, elementary school, graduation. They don't even get to see that. Now, how terrible is that? You know, we in the West, although we often have our own difficulties, we don't really know how lucky we are. You know, imagine not being able to grow up or see your own children as they grow up. That's the reality for, I think, probably, I have to say, millions of people in the Philippines. You know, I'm always very positive. I'm always the kind of person on social media who would say how wonderful the Philippines is. And of course, the Philippines is wonderful, but you do need to have money. You know, me personally, I wouldn't retire back in the Philippines unless I had a job, an income, a house. Otherwise, it's the impossible dream. You know, it's all right if you live in Manila, if you live in the city, you know, you maybe get by, work in a call center. And even some of those people in the provinces, maybe they work on the family farm, they're earning a certain life. But if you want more, if you want to send your kids to the best school in the Philippines, you know, British school Manila is something like $40,000 a year, if not more. And if you want to send your kids to the best schools in the Philippines, you need money. So some OFWs, maybe they work in the oil industry or shipping industry, they don't get to see their children for years upon years upon years. And that's absolutely tragically sad. And I believe the government needs to do more. You know, I'm not going to criticize the government because I support the government strongly. But what I would say is, you know, salaries need to go up. A nurse is earning maybe £400 a month, £500 a month. If she's abroad, she can earn £2,000 a month. You know, how is that fair? And yet you have these billionaire mall owners who employ people for next to nothing. I was back home in Manila a few years ago, and I had a glass of orange juice, and it cost something like 400 pesos. And the guy working in the mall told me, when you drink that orange juice, that's my daily salary. And that's the reality of it.
Yeah, yeah.
You know,
Correct.
and Hana, you also worked in London.
No, I studied in London for a
Studied in
year.
London.
Yeah, but I worked in Japan before when I was 20 years old. So I also experienced being abroad and being the breadwinner of the family. I really understand that you have to send your salary and you have to like lose the budget of your food abroad. You really have to, you know, budget so you can send bigger money to the Philippines.
Right.
Yes, correct. Yeah.
And Maya, was there ever a time that your suffering in silence impacted your having to work or having to look for more work or circumstances? And I think you worked a few places in the world.
Yes, well, I start working when I was 9 years old. I mean, 9 years old with my uncle's house. My aunt's house is the elder brother of my sister, my another uncle. So I started to work at 9 years old for a few months. Then I transferred to another different house, which is relatives, because I moved to different houses. I think I stayed more than 20 or 30 houses in Manuel Janga. You've been there in Manuel Janga.
Right.
And there's a lot of houses. So we have lots of relatives in Manuel Janga. And they confused why I keep moving into houses and houses, because they don't know what was my dark secrets is. Then at the age of 13, I left in the village to find a better job. I mean, to work in the city, because I was thinking that there's no future. There's no future. There's no future for me in that village. So I went to the radio station to look for work, and luckily that I wasn't hired, because I think it wasn't for me. And
Well, you said it was coincidental because you end up staying in the restroom too long and the man left.
Yes,
that's written in your book, but that was a good coincidence, it seemed.
Yes, because that time during the time there was a lot of humors, and it was a time of Japanese, I don't know, Chinese or Japanese, I'm not saying everybody, that there was a recruit about prostitution. It was the year of recruitment of prostitution, I sorry, prostitution in the Philippines, and I was 13 years old. And then I was lucky that I went to the toilet, and this white car arrived, and I wasn't there, and they were looking for me, and I spent a lot of time in the bathroom. And when I came out, and the security guard said that, where have you been? I mean, the DG, where have you been? The family came over to pick you up, but there's nowhere you to find. I don't know where you have been. And I said, I went to the toilet. And they said that, oh, they've gone anyway. Then and we found out that they are, they
Doing
are a group
trafficking.
of, yeah, trafficking the time. So the DJ decided to save me and took me home. So I work as a nanny or a housekeeper to his house. Then I moved to, after a few months, I moved to different cities like 5 hours away from the city. Then after that, I moved to another house to survive, to finish my high school. Then I moved so many
Yeah.
houses to survive. So it wasn't easy to stay, to survive, because I feel like if I don't do this, I will not gonna finish my school. Then I moved to, after that, then I went to university, to college. Then my college, I couldn't concentrate to study, because I work during the day and go to school, go to the college in the afternoon. Then I decided not to pursue my, my college, because I couldn't do it
Right,
in
right.
between work and things. So I moved again to Manila to work as a housekeeper at the age of, I think I was 18, or no, I was 19 or 20 years old, because I left in the Philippines when I was 21
And
for Middle East.
yeah. And then like Hannah, like consequentially, it sounds like the danger is like what Malcolm was saying, that if you're already suffering in silence from 7.5 years old, like we covered in the other episodes of sexual abuse by an uncle in the home, and as a young person going from home to home for employment, the risk was there that anyone in any of those homes could have made Maya suffer again by becoming a perpetrator again, or she could have been a victim again. So fortunately, she stood her ground in order to start turning that pain into power.
There's something else that might be quite relevant to say, and I mentioned it before, and that's that a lot of overseas Filipino workers end up in the Middle East. And, I hate to say this, but if you work in the Middle East, it's almost like a lottery. Either,
Yes.
you'll have a good employer or a bad employer. And I have to say, in the Middle East, there are many Filipinos who suffer terrible circumstances of maybe being beaten, abused, mistreated, not paid their salary on time. And it's often the domestic workers who are actually within the household. And of course, when they do go back home to the Philippines, they're actually quite young. So, this is their first time abroad, and sometimes they do get taken advantage of, which is terrible. And, the government and previous governments, not just this one, this is too early to say with this government, but previous governments very much have relied on these overseas remittances and this OFW dollars, I've got to say. And, the other side of the coin is that for some of these workers, life can be pretty tough, and a lot of them get mistreated. And I do wonder, I know President Duterte, the previous president, was very tough on this when he heard about allegations of abuse, saying, I think it was Kuwait, I think he banned Filipinos from going there. And I think that's very good. And I think there needs to be a tougher stance. And I know, not talking about politics at all, but I think the government does really need to stand up for these overseas Filipino workers. On the one hand, life is tough in the Philippines, so they're faced with that choice to go abroad. And then on the other hand, it is this lottery that shouldn't be happening in the 21st century. People shouldn't be forced to go abroad to better their lives. It should be an economic choice, not a necessity, which it often is for Filipinos. I'm so sorry to say that.
And it feeds into our theme, because it's another form of suffering in silence because of someone thinking they must. Harlene, I'm going to put you in the spot again. Is there a Tagalish set of words for what people are doing? This need to go overseas and work and send remittance at home?
Yeah, Tagalog words for that. I think it's ano ba, OFW.
Overseas.
Hirap buhay, which means life is poor, life is hard in the Philippines.
Wait a minute.
People are forced
Wait a minute.
Trabaho doon sa buong mundo. So Dubai,
mahirap,
because life is so hard back home to Filipinos.
Right here in Free Talk, we Maya, we have the Englishman giving Tagalog words.
Yeah. Normally we just call it OFW and that's it. That's basically Filipino working abroad. We don't have that specific word for Tagalog. I don't know.
Yeah, well, there is like a just a saying, like what Malcolm was saying, life is hard, in Spanish they'll say mucho trabajo, poquito dinero, right? A lot of work, little money. So very similar.
Lisod ang kinabuhi in Bisaya. Lisod ang kinabuhi.
Yeah. Pobre.
Yeah. So as we have so many dialects, we do want our listeners in Philippines to know that we understand, and I look forward to having Malcolm on again, because that subject of the overseas worker is a form of suffering in silence, and there's probably a lot of people who appreciate in Dubai, in UAE, in Kuwait, in the Middle East in general, us talking about the good job everyone is doing by sending a remittance home and helping the families at home, but how difficult it can be and how much of a suffering in silence it is, and a need to turn that pain into power. And so, yes, all of these things are happening, but we must be cognizant. When I take a picture in front of a pretty building, it does not mean those are my conditions.
Completely right. If some of the people who've built your pretty building have sadly passed away due to the long working hours, even during Ramadan, there were workers in certain Middle Eastern nations, and I won't specifically mention them, who are working out in the boiling hot heat of the day and have lost their lives to make the Middle East what it is. And many of those sacrifices have been from Filipinos who've been mistreated. A lot of the time it's the Indian workers who tend to be the ones that are climbing up the building. But even so, I still think it's absolutely terrible. No worker should lose their life in a commercial project. I know some Gulf states have improved. For example, Bahrain has got very strict laws, and I know the UAE now has stricter laws. But you know what I think, and very quickly, I hope you don't mind me saying this, I think there needs to be almost a register of safe employers. Well, you hear of these stories of a Filipino worker maybe would go to their employer, they've mistreated an employee, they then manage to get rid of them, they get another employee, etc. There needs to be a database, and the Philippine government should only send overseas workers to the Middle East if the employer is on that database of safe employers. And if they have an incident where the Filipino worker is treated badly, they should be barred from employing a Filipino worker. I've always thought that.
Very interesting, very interesting. So Maya, before we close out this episode, I wanted to hear about some of the places after you left London or while you were in London, places you worked because you had to work for your living.
I think before, after or before.
You left the Philippines and went to the UK for work.
No, I left in the Philippines in 1997, went to Middle East in Qatar. In Qatar, yes, that was my first job when I was 21 years old, looking after a 5 days old baby. A nanny in Middle East in 1997 to 1998. Then I arrived in the UK 1998, December 31st. 31st, yes, I was 22. It was really cold running. It was very, very freezing cold when I arrived in the UK. So
Right?
this is my after the Middle East, I arrived to the UK. When I was in the Middle East, it was really like what Malcolm said, that it's like a lottery, because in the first place I was okay looking after this baby, but my employer separated because my employer was number 30 wives. So my yes, my boss has a 5 wives, because I think he's a sheikh, or a rich man in the country. So my employer was number 3. So after a few months of work, and my boss didn't arrive for I think 1 month or 2 months, didn't visit his third wife. So they have an argument and they separated. So they decided me to send back to the Philippines, but my contract, it wasn't finished yet. So my boss said that, okay, you gonna work to my sister as a housekeeper. Then so he sent me to his sister, but after a few days of work to his sister, I encountered a really bad experience, because his nephew, her sister's son, tried to do something bad to me. I was cleaning in the bathroom, in the bedroom, in the bathroom, and he grabbed my arms, and he grabbed my hands, but his brother saw him ask that he grabbed my arms. So I was so scared. And then this boy said in Arabic that yalla yalla, something like this. So he left me. I was shaking. But he came back um he come back with something, that saying that go to the kitchen, do some gawa is tea. So I was boiling water in the kettle to make some gawa. And then after that, when the water, after the boiling, he said to me, okay, go back to the bedroom and clean my room. So I went back. Then I didn't realize he had this hot water, and he poured it into the cushion in the floor, the hot water. Then when he poured to the, I didn't see that he poured the hot water into the cushion. Then he said to me, I was cleaning the bathroom, he said, come and do some gawa to me. And because he grabbed my arms in the first place, and then I was shaking, I was scared, what's he gonna do to me. And I was thinking that maybe he's going to rape me or do something. But I was being strong, I
Like
was being
react to
strong.
it.
Yes, but he pushed me to the cushion. So he pushed me to the cushion. My knee was on that cushion that he poured hot water. So I still have a scars on my knee.
Right, right, right.
So my
Can I just
knee
say,
was, yeah.
I'm so sorry to hear that, but these are not the only circumstances I've heard about. You've even heard about employees in the Middle East are actually pouring boiling hot water, and I've even seen photos of this. They're
Mhm.
pouring boiling hot water on these domestic workers. It seems to
Yeah.
be that some Filipinos are suffering so badly.
Yes.
And
Yes.
there needs to be an urgent way of dealing with this, because it is literally a life lottery. Unfortunately, some
Yes.
Yeah.
Filipinos do
Yes.
actually
Yes.
die when they
Yeah.
work in the Middle East. How is that humane? But that's the reality of it. Can I just say also very quickly that when some Filipinos say, I'm going to go to America, or I'm going to go to the UK, it's wonderful. The reality is it's pretty tough. And unless you're coming over as a healthcare worker, maybe as a nurse or a doctor or an engineer, it's absolutely impossible. And life in the UK is also tough. So for some, and I'm sure you would agree, Maya, staying back home in the Philippines maybe or probably is a better option. I know life is hard, but sometimes, you've got to stay home, because if you go abroad, it's fraught with dangers and difficulties. Do you want to add to that?
Yes.
That's my opinion.
And
Yeah.
I say it too quite often, and some people look at me thinking I'm not trying to help them. I says, no, you don't understand that maybe you have not experienced it, but it's safer at home with a little more poverty than it is to have
Yeah.
affluence in
Yes.
danger. And so we
Yes.
have to be careful. I mean, and that leads us right into our next week episode, it talks about other countries and other cultures. And so we
Yes.
look forward to talk about that next week in another episode.
Great. Yes.
Yeah. And Malcolm, we look forward to having you on again anytime Maya invites you. And
Yes.
and Hannah, I'm glad you're home.
Yeah.
Safe. And yes, like Malcolm was saying, when you go to study, it's a little bit different than when you're going to work. But again, there's no place like home.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Like,
Thank you
there's
so
no
much.
wherever you
And
are.
Maya, congratulations on your book and your advocacy. You're doing such incredible work and you're
Thank you.
raising very important issues in the Philippines. And, I really do believe, so you need some kind of, you don't need, but I hope the government would fully recognize the work that you're doing. And I'm very proud of what you're doing. And of course, please buy Maya's book, Suffered in Silence. I've asked to have a copy myself, if I can buy a copy myself. She's really an ambassador for women. And very courageous, and I'd like to pay tribute. But also, Mr. B, your show is amazing. Giving this opportunity to people is wonderful. So I pay tribute to all of you.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you, Hannah. Thank you, Maya. And definitely thank you, Malcolm.
Thank you so much.
See
Thank
y'all,
you.
and thank you for
See you next
sharing
week.
on another episode of Free Talk with Mr. Eaton.